A huge thank you to UnVale, the sponsor of today's video. UnVale is a place where you can keep together writing and images of your original characters online in a way that makes sense and makes it easier to create. You build out your profile, you add new characters, and then within each character profile, you can write whatever you want about them, as well as adding a bunch of images that sort of represent who they are. I've put in concept art as well as character sheets and sketches, just anything that I feel like really helps me imagine this character. This is a site that is all about creating, managing, and sharing your original characters, which as someone who makes characters all the time, I'm just really excited about. UnVale is also completely anti-AI art and anti-NFT, so that is not something you have to worry about in this community. UnVale really feels like it was made for artists. I really love the way these character pages works, especially the traits list. It's just such an easy way to add tons and tons of really in-depth detail about the characters. Again, thank you so much to UnVale. Please check out my link in the description if you would like to try it out yourself. It is free to use, and feel free to add me. I am on there under the name LavenderTowne. Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and today I'm going to be doing a do this not that style video about how to make your art interesting. Now I know this isn't as clear of a topic as some of the other ones I've done, like coloring and inking, but this is an incredibly important skill and there are very specific things you can do to improve this. So when I was first learning how to draw and getting into drawing different characters, I remember thinking that a lot of my art, especially with different characters in the same image, looked really boring and I couldn't really figure out why it was looking so stiff. Now I've done videos where I talk about posing before and I'm going to get into some of that here as well, but the most important thing when it comes to drawing characters in a way that is dynamic is making sure that they actually acknowledge and interact with each other. Here, for example, I am doing an illustration the way that I used to do when I was still learning to do this, basically. And here I'll show you some actual examples from my beginner art, where, as you can see, I'm kind of just drawing the characters in proximity to each other. Sometimes they might be looking at each other, but that's as far as their interaction goes. And this is actually a huge problem. Now, there's an obvious reason why I used to do this and why many beginner artists do this. It's because actually having your characters interact with each other and overlap with each other is kind of hard. If you're the type of person who usually likes to draw your characters in like a 3/4 angle from the shoulders up, chances are that when you move on to these types of compositions, this is the type of composition you're automatically going to do. And if you don't intentionally push yourself to do something different, you're going to keep replicating this over and over again, just like I did. Now, you can sometimes see in my old work that I was trying to get the characters to interact. This image with the scarf is a good example where I was essentially able to keep the characters completely apart while still having them acknowledge each other. But the best thing you can do to make an image look more lived in and interesting is to have them impact each other in more significant ways. Like if a character is leaning up against another character and then having their hair and their clothes affected by that contact, that just adds sort of a 3D feeling to your art, even if you're drawing really cartoony like I do, and it makes a big difference. And especially if you want to make comics or anything like that in the future, you want to be able to do this because it's going to be really hard to convey a story, whether it's an action story or a romance story, without the characters actually interacting in that way. I find that comic artists who haven't learned this skill end up making stories where the characters are just talking heads going back and forth in the different panels, and it gets very repetitive and very boring over time. So with my characters here, there's a little bit more interest because one of the characters is considerably taller than the other two, but still all of their eye lines are relatively similar in a similar spot on the page, and that's also a bad thing. This is something I was notorious for in my beginner phase, and I still, again, my impulse a lot of the times is to draw my characters with a little bubble around them where they're not interacting with each other, they're not blocking each other's faces or shoulders or anything like that. It's something that I still have to actively push against. So there's absolutely no shame in this if this is a habit that you have, but it is something to work on. I also want to talk about color because color can make a huge difference in how the eye is guided through the image, and it can make your whole image look more harmonious or more clashy and not interesting. Now, the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is to be so attached to your color palette that you're not willing to change it in order to make things more harmonious or better looking. So here I have like my flat colors for each of these characters. As you can see, they all have a similar color palette. They all have little pops of red and mainly monochromatic clothing here. Now, I like this color palette. Obviously, I picked it out for my characters, but in this image, I don't think it's really serving the characters well, and it makes everything look very flat, especially with the very like grayish shading that I'm using. It's not really bringing them together, even though they kind of have the same color palettes. So now I'm going to start the good example, or the do, of this video, and right off the bat you can see I'm trying to sketch out the characters at radically different parts of the illustration. Like, their faces are living in different pieces of the canvas. I'm also making sure that the characters are either interacting with each other or they're interacting with an object that's taking their attention. I've talked about this in countless tutorials before, but having a character actually interact with or do some kind of verb is a great way to make the character actually feel alive and like they're actually doing something, not just standing there for the viewer to look at. So for our two primary characters up here at the front, I have one character leaning up against the lap of the other, and trying to decide how they're going to specifically interact is something that you want to have completely nailed down in the sketch before you start inking, of course. Little things like adjustments to the hair and the direction that the eyes are looking are okay to change later, but you really want to make sure that in your sloppy, sort of loose sketch phase that you're really understanding how these characters are impacting each other and what they're covering up. Now, I made sure that both the characters' faces would be visible. This is something that is really important when you're making an illustration. People tend to love looking at faces. It's why many successful thumbnails on YouTube have a big picture of the YouTuber's face on it, making some kind of expression. So if you're just trying to make an illustration that is going to grab people, having character faces clearly showing and emoting is a really important part of that. This seems super obvious, but believe me, it is something that you can sort of fall into blocking off or not showing as well as you could if you're trying too hard to make the characters look natural and not also considering cheating out, which is a phrase that people usually use in theater, where you subtly move your body and your face to be pointed more towards the audience, even if it would be more natural to be faced more towards another actor. This is something that you can apply to illustrations as well, and this is a constant balance of like trying to make things look realistic and natural, while also making sure that the audience is seeing everything they want to see. But I find that most of the time there's no hard and fast rule for this. It's best to just kind of go with your gut and keep checking in and making sure that this is the posing that you're happy with. Now, once I got all the line work done here, I needed to start thinking about coloring. I talked about what not to do already, which is generally just basic good advice. Make sure things are harmonious, make sure that your shading isn't too gray and boring. In this case, one thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that a couple colors, or at least one color, are popping on each character, particularly the two in the front. Now, the character that I have in the back, he has a jacket that has a very like blood red collar, and he has other red accents on his outfit, but I've decided to make sure that he's wearing his less noticeable outfit and not showing the red accents as much, because he's going to be in the background and he's mostly serving as a piece of the environment, whereas the two girls in the front are the thing that I want the audience to look at first. So I'm going to be boosting some of the saturation, particularly of the girl's eyes. The one character up at the farthest left, I'm making her eyes a little bit more red and just a stronger color in general. And then the character who's more like leaning on her lap, I'm boosting her yellow eye color and making sure that the light from the window is also highlighting them. This is another thing that I super recommend, and it's so fun to do. When you're placing placing your characters in an environment, you can use the light sources to literally act as like a natural spotlight. You are the god of the illustration, so you can decide where everything goes, and you should use that power to the best effect that you possibly can, meaning that if you want the audience's eyes to go somewhere, make that the point of highest contrast. Usually that means putting them by a window, or maybe like right outside of the tree line where the shadows are sort of popping them out of the environment and then the light is hitting their body and face. I tried to use differently colored lines to explain the various ways that I'm trying to make this image a little bit more interesting and to guide the eye around. So for example, I've drawn in where each character is looking. We have a natural human tendency to follow the eyes of the characters, and so I also pointed that out, as well as points of contact with the characters, the different areas of the picture where their face is, and just generally how I feel like the eyes are being guided around in this illustration. And I feel like trying to just consider that, and that alone, will already help you a lot if this is something that you struggle with. The last thing I want to say about your art looking boring to you, or just feeling like everybody else's art looks more exciting, is the point that you've been looking at your own art for probably hours and hours, and so naturally you're going to get tired of looking at it, and it's going to seem less dynamic, less surprising, and less exciting than the art that you just glance at and it's already finished. So I do want to remind all of you to be gentle with yourselves. You don't need to go too hard on this. This is just something to keep in mind. If you feel like you're in a bit of a slump, this is something that always makes me sort of push myself to make better and better illustrations, I feel like. And it's when I forget these fundamentals about making my characters sort of doing an actual action, having physical contact with each other, and intentionally guiding the viewer's eye around. When I have all these things in mind, I find that it's easier to make a piece of art that I'm actually happy and proud of by the end. And I think that that's kind of what we're all going for, isn't it? But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope some of this advice was helpful to you, and I will see you guys in the next one. A huge thank you to all of my patrons, including Grexius, Olia, Liddy Savior, Roro, Rayons, Vorpalmat, Brandon Stark, CB, Crosby F, Lucy Yamajiki, Live Live, Salty Jackrabbit, Ravens Crow, Saucelot, T-Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astral Fox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Subaki, Cutie Pie, Ruined Raincrow, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Lib 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 Lib.